Between 1972 and 1973, the bodies of 4 young Black and Puerto Rican boys were discovered in Manhattan, New York. As most of them were mutilated in the same horrible way, it soon became clear that authorities were dealing with a serial killer. The person who people widely believe was so-called Charlie Chopoff was eventually found and charged with murder. But why is the case still officially considered open after almost 50 years?
Discretion is advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, I'm the host, and thank you for joining today. If it's your first time listening, be sure you are subscribed to this podcast. If by the end of it you think it's cool and you might like to listen to more episodes, then that's cool with me. You have my approval, not that you need it. You can do anything on Beyonce's internet, and I can't control you. But I would appreciate it if you subscribe to 10-Minute Murder. You can also connect with the show on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The links are in the show notes of this episode. And of course, as always, if you have friends that are into brief true crime stories like this, you can let them know about the podcast as well. Now, let's get to today's story. The first victim was 8-year-old Douglas Owens. On a rainy day of March 9th, 1972, his body was found on a rooftop 2 blocks from where he lived in Harlem, at a building on East 121st Street. He had been stabbed 38 times, mostly to his neck and chest, and his genitals were sliced pretty badly, almost severed from his body. In addition, Douglas was not wearing his shoes, and there were signs of sexual assault. Just 6 weeks later, the killer struck again. However, this time, his victim lived, but just barely. An unnamed 10-year-old boy was assaulted on April 20th and left for dead in the hallway of an apartment building. As in Douglas's case, the attack happened on a rainy day when the victim was running errands. The boy had been stabbed and sodomized, and his attacker had removed the victim's genitals and taken them with him when he was fleeing the scene. Miraculously, even though the 10-year-old was severely injured, he did manage to survive. He gave the police a partial description of the man who attacked him. According to him, the man had medium dark skin, was a slender adult with a mole on his left cheek, and possibly walked with a limp. The police artist made a sketch of the features, even though the 10-year-old's description was pretty vague due to his trauma. However, he remembered that the attacker called himself Michael as he lured the boy into the building with a promise of 50 cents. A disturbing detail: the victim's genitals were later found in a park by the police, who found a group of children playing with them. On October 23rd, around 5:30 p.m., Mary Hubbard reported her 9-year-old son, Wendell, missing. She had been calling the boy to come back inside their apartment on the Upper West Side, but Wendell was nowhere to be found. Mary knew about what happened to 2 other boys earlier that year, and it wasn't normal for her son to ignore her, so she immediately began to worry. After speaking with Mary, officers cruised around the area, keeping their eyes open for anybody that fit Wendell's description, but nobody saw him. It seemed like the earth had swallowed up the little boy, while in reality, it was quite the opposite. 4 hours passed without any news, without any signs of the 9-year-old. But then at 9:45 p.m., another boy playing on the roof of the 5th Avenue building came across Wendell's lifeless body. The boy ran down to the street to flag down the officers, who then asked Mary to come identify her son's mutilated body. He had been stabbed at least 17 times in the abdomen, neck, and chest, and his penis had been sliced off and carried away. He had also been sodomized. Keeping in mind that Wendell's apartment building was just 6 blocks away from where Douglas Owens' body was found, detectives organized a search in the area and went through the building door to door, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual. After all, Mary had seen her son from a window moments before something had gone horribly wrong. It is possible that Wendell was trying to get home following his mother's calls, but had encountered his killer inside the building on his way up. However, nobody reported seeing anything useful. On the evening of March 6, 1973, a 9-year-old Puerto Rican boy named Luis Ortiz went missing after purchasing bread and milk at a local store. His body was not discovered until the next day at around 1 p.m. in East Harlem. He was dumped in the basement stairwell of a building at 200 West 106th Street. He had been stabbed 38 times in the back, neck, and chest, and the killer had again taken a souvenir from the boy's groin area. By now, The child killer was known as Charlie Chopoff, for obvious reasons. This time, multiple witnesses reported seeing the boy's abductor. Over 300 tips were called in, and while most of them were useless, some of them helped put together a composite photo of the mystery man. The witnesses seemed to be identifying the same person who had killed others before Louise, and their statements matched. Apparently, the suspect was Hispanic, between 30 and 40 years old, slender, and stood about 5 feet 7 to 5 feet 10 inches tall. He had scars on his face, in addition to a mole on his left cheek and black marks on his chin. If it wasn't crystal clear to the police before that they had a serial killer on the loose, now it was. They had 3 dead kids in the morgue, and the local community was in an uproar. Public meetings were held to figure out what to do. The sketch of Charlie Chopoff was distributed all over, and a local class even made a video warning to other children to stay away from strangers. As is pretty common with serial killers that make the news, a special task force was developed to track down suspects. Still, they were too far behind to stop the next attack. 8-year-old Stephen Cropper's body was discovered on the 6th floor of a tenement house by a woman walking her dog around 5:30 p.m. on August 17, 1973. While police believe he was another victim of the serial killer, the crime scene was different this time around. First of all, Stephen had been slashed with a razor blade rather than stabbed with a knife, and his cause of death was a severed artery in his arm. Secondly, even though his body was positioned in a sexually suggestive manner, the boy's penis was still intact, which did not fit the MO of Charlie Chopoff. However, Stephen's shoes had been removed like the other victims. Even though they weren't entirely sure the latest attack was the handiwork of the same person, the search for the boy's killer intensified even further. The police had pulled in 100 suspects for questioning, many of them convicted sex offenders, but no progress was made. More and more calls came in, reporting alleged sightings of the suspect, but when police ran each lead down, they came up with nothing. On August 21st, an employee at the Neenah Comprehensive Health Service Center called the police because he noticed a man who resembled the sketch of Charlie Chopoff. That suspect was apprehended and named to the press, 22-year-old L. Gonzalez. He lived on East Houston Street and was unemployed after being discharged from the Air Force. There was not really a reason to take him to the station other than the fact that he had dark hair and a slight build, and that alone was enough for the public to judge him too. They were ready to put him away forever. However, when previous witnesses were called to the police station, they did not confirm his identity. As the police tried to release Gonzalez due to the lack of evidence, a mob of 500 protesters formed around the station, ready to get their hands on the man they thought was the child killer. Eventually, the police didn't have any other choice but to sneak Gonzalez out of the station disguised as a policeman. That plan worked, and they made it out of the area unnoticed, while the angry crowd shouted and demanded to see the killer. After that, another guy that resembled the sketch of the suspect was chased completely out of the neighborhood and into a local river. The people there were going absolutely nuts. A few weeks after Stephen Cropper's murder, a man named Daniel Olivio was charged with molesting a 5-year-old boy. Everybody immediately noticed that he fit the description of Charlie Chopoff. Daniel was 5'7", dark-complected, dark-haired, and had pockmarks on his face, and he walked with a limp. It couldn't be just a coincidence, right? It was. Soon enough, police found out that Daniel's movements did not match well with the time of the murders. He was a disgusting human being for sure, but that didn't make him Charlie Chopoff. Finally, in May 1974, the police arrested the most promising suspect they had during the whole investigation, 33-year-old Erno Soto, a patient at the Manhattan State Hospital. He was caught while trying to abduct a 9-year-old Hispanic boy who was running an errand. Fortunately, the boy was able to escape and yell for help. Neighbors then detained Erno until the police arrived. Given his disorganized mental state, Erno was taken right away to the prison psychiatric ward at Bellevue Hospital for an evaluation. He fit the profile of Charlie Chopoff perfectly and even had relatives in all the neighborhoods where the boys had been found dead. The mental institution that had been Erno's home every now and then was 20 blocks from the first murder, 27 from the second one, and directly across the street from where the 10-year-old had been found attacked. In addition, Erno's father lived in the same neighborhood as Stephen Cropper. Erno and his wife were both Puerto Rican and had become estranged but reunited after some time. During their time apart, Erno's wife had some other relationships, and soon after their reunion, she gave birth to another man's baby. Erno apparently did his best to make the marriage work. However, by the boy's 8th birthday, Erno's mental state began to deteriorate. He was hospitalized multiple times for violent behavior, and had been arrested on several occasions, primarily for burglary and narcotics. After Erno was taken into custody, the police also found a witness who claimed that he had seen Erno with Stephen Cropper on the day of his death. And while the 10-year-old survivor didn't fully identify Erno in the lineup, the boy said he looked similar to his attacker. Erno himself even confessed to police that he stalked young black boys in the area, and he was the one responsible for Stephen's death. But he said he had nothing to do with the other boys. Erno reportedly told the police that God told him to, quote, make little boys into girls. Police were absolutely certain that they had their man, and so Erno was charged with the murder of Stephen Cropper. They were finally about to close the case when they had kept everybody on their toes for 2 years. However, at trial, Erno Soto was diagnosed with schizophrenia and found not guilty by reason of insanity. This technicality meant that nobody was found guilty of any of the Charlie Chop-Off murders, and the case is still considered an open one, even though the murders conveniently stopped after Erno was institutionalized. So officially, the case of Stephen Cropper and the 4 other victims is unsolved, but Erno Soto is widely believed to be the killer, and the police could have actually caught him earlier. 2 weeks after Luis Ortiz's death, a woman living in the Bronx called the police to tell them she knew who the child's killer was. She named Erno Soto, but just because he didn't fit the surviving boy description to the last detail, the matter was dropped. They didn't even speak to Erno himself, so no wonder the people of New York were trying to take matters into their own hands. That's today's 10-minute murder. Brief and bingeable true crime. Thanks for listening today, and I apologize that the details of this case were a little more grotesque than normal. But obviously, because of the nature of the story, I couldn't leave that part out. Hey, before you go, look at where you're listening right now. Whatever platform you're listening on right now, subscribe to 10-Minute Murder, and when you become a subscriber, your life will change immensely. I legally can't tell you that all your dreams will come true, but I'm not saying they won't. Also, if you've got friends that are into true crime stories, maybe brief ones like this, let them know about 10-Minute Murder. Be safe. Thanks for listening, and have a good night.